Imani Caldwell walked into the boardroom, thinking it was her promotion day, until the CEO slid her proposal across the table and said, "Nice work, we'll take it from here." They'd stolen her company, erased her name, and called it Diversity Progress. Outside, reporters were already calling it a historic partnership. But Imani had one card left, buried in a folder marked confidential. And if she opened it, someone's empire would fall by morning. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun crested low over Aspen's silver horizon, the wind slicing cold and sharp as blades. Snow whispered across the grounds of the Varelli Resort, a secluded fortress of glass and cedar, reserved only for the elite. CEOs, venture capital kings, oil heirs, and the blue blood billionaires whose names owned everything from skyscrapers to senators. And through that wind, Imani Caldwell walked alone, heels clicking against the frozen stone, with the rhythm of intention. Her tailored navy coat hugged her frame. Beneath it, a sharp-cut gray pantsuit clung like armor. In one gloved hand, she carried a simple black leather briefcase, and behind her, each step pressed deep into the snow, carving a bold path that would not be erased. A metaphor walked with her, the footprints of a black woman rising. Imani had built Aurora X from the cracked concrete of doubt. Born in the Bronx, raised by a single mother who'd once spent 72 hours in lockup for a crime she didn't commit, Imani's tech empire was not just profit, it was protest. Aurora X used artificial intelligence to root out racial bias in systems, policing, hiring, housing, even sentencing data. Her code didn't just run algorithms, it told uncomfortable truths. This retreat in Aspen wasn't her first pitch, but it was her most dangerous. She was the first black female founder ever invited to the Sterling Summit, a private event hosted annually by the Sterling family, a dynasty built on oil, tobacco, and generational power. The patriarch, Randolph Sterling, was known for two things: ruthlessly growing companies, and quietly crushing those who offended him. His wife, Marjorie Sterling, wielded charm like a scalpel. Their sons, Bradford and Lucas, were legacies who treated every meeting like a frat game. Imani knew what she was walking into. But she also knew she didn't come to impress them. She came to secure the final round of funding that would push Aurora X global. Inside the Sterling Lodge, warmth from the fireplace kissed the polished mahogany floors. Servants floated between rooms in muted silence, pouring champagne for the attendees. It smelled like old money, fresh wood, and delicate rot. Imani stood at the edge of the presentation room, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. Around the oval glass table sat 12 investors. 11 were white. One, an Asian American woman from Boston, gave her a slight nod. The seat across from Randolph Sterling remained empty, until the moment he entered, trailed by Marjorie and the boys. Their arrival shifted the room's air. Randolph's eyes swept across Imani. They didn't linger long. Marjorie, perfectly coiffed in pearls and pastel cashmere, took her place with a small sigh as if she'd just survived an inconvenience. Bradford adjusted his Rolex in slow motion. Lucas smirked without reason. Imani opened her laptop. Her hands were steady. "Thank you for the invitation," she began, voice smooth as obsidian. Aurora X isn't just another AI startup. It's the first system built to undo systemic bias by exposing it. Her opening slide bloomed behind her, an image of court sentencing data, showing black defendants receiving 35% longer sentences than white peers for identical crimes. The room stayed silent. Imani didn't falter. She walked them through her tech, how it flagged racial patterns in institutional decision-making, how it offered real-time corrections, how it could objectively dismantle bias from the inside. She ended with numbers: 270% growth in 6 months, city contracts across Chicago, Newark, and Atlanta, a waiting list of 5 major hospitals, and a $1 billion valuation in the upcoming round. Then it came. From the end of the table, Marjorie Sterling leaned back, lips twisted into something resembling a smile. "Oh, darling," she drawled, "that's a lovely presentation, but forgive me for asking, did you actually build this yourself?" The words didn't land as a question. They floated, coated in sweet poison. The room shifted. One man coughed quietly. Another looked down at his hands. Imani held her composure. "Yes, I did. I coded the prototype in my apartment." Aurora X was bootstrapped. No inherited capital, no incubators.
Marjorie's smile widened like a wound. "How impressive. You must be very determined."
Then, Bradford snorted. Loud, disrespectful. She looks like HR, not a damn CEO. Laughter followed, not full belly laughs, but the kind that slice, muted, mean-spirited, shared glances across privilege. Even Randolph chuckled, one brow raised as if she were an exotic bird performing tricks. Imani felt the burn rise beneath her skin, but she buried it. Her face was marble, her pulse, a war drum. Well, Randolph said finally, folding his hands, we like the ambition. But your product, it's a bit too socially conscious for our portfolio. Investors want clean lines, not messy headlines. You understand. Do you, Marjorie added softly, have any experience with scaling operations? Or will this need constant coaching? The insult lay bare. She wasn't seen as a builder. She was a black woman in a white space. An anomaly to be analyzed, not respected. Imani closed her laptop slowly. Stood taller. I've scaled a company from poverty, she said coolly. My first server ran off an EBT-covered meal plan. Now it serves 3 million queries a day. Lucas chuckled. So we'd be buying soul with software? More laughter. No one intervened. No one defended her. The moment crystallized. Imani, brilliant and poised, surrounded by sneers disguised as business strategy. She nodded once, turned and walked toward the exit. The laughter followed her like wolves. But just before the doors closed behind her, Imani reached into her coat, pulled out a small folder from the inner lining, its label barely visible. Confidential. Exit deal. And in that second, something in her eyes changed. Not fear, not hurt.
A cold kind of wall.
She stepped into the hallway, face unreadable, but deep in her coat pocket, her fingers tapped 3 times against the folder. A signal. Down the hall, a hidden camera blinked red to green, and recorded everything. The hallway lights buzzed faintly above her, their glow bouncing off the polished marble and glinting against the folder in her hand. Imani Caldwell walked silently down the corridor of the Sterling Lodge, her heels echoing like a metronome of resolve. Behind her their laughter still lingered, soft now, muffled by distance but burning. They thought they'd humiliated her. They didn't know she was recording. Her grip tightened on the confidential exit deal folder. It wasn't just a collection of legal strategy. It was insurance, leverage, and if need be, fire. But before she'd drawn this line, before Aurora X had even existed, there was another echo, a more haunting one, the one that had truly birthed the war. And just like that, her mind slipped backward. It was 1992, and 8-year-old Imani sat on a cold bench inside the South Bronx 44th Precinct, her legs swinging in silent rhythm, her back stiff against fear. A clock ticked behind the bulletproof glass. Every now and then the door creaked open and another officer passed, eyes skimming over her like a shadow. She was wearing a puffy red coat, one mitten missing. She held onto a torn sketch pad, her drawings smudged. Her mother, Danielle Caldwell, a CNA and part-time waitress, had been arrested for obstructing justice. The real story. She'd told an officer not to rough up a neighbor's teenage son, who was on the ground, cuffed and bleeding. Danielle was thrown into the back of a cruiser without even letting Imani grab her coat. They held her without charges for over 40 hours.
Imani remembered every second. The clank of vending machines, the smell of wet boots and old paper, the way the receptionist looked away when she asked if her mother was okay. Her tears had dried by hour 5. What replaced them was something more violent than fear. Purpose. Flashed to Imani, now 28, sat cross-legged on the floor of her one-bedroom Oakland apartment, the glow of 2 monitors painting her walls in binary green and midnight blue. Coffee-stained notes covered her desk. Code flickered like constellations. She had just received her 7th rejection letter from a major VC firm. One of them had the nerve to reply, "Love the idea, but can you get a more technical co-founder to lead? This feels more like a DEI initiative." That sentence lived in her chest like a splinter. So she built it herself. Every night after her job at an IT help desk, Imani came home and coded, alone. She studied AI ethics from MIT lectures at 2 a.m., scraped datasets from public court records, spent weekends watching body cam footage, frame by frame. Her social life disappeared. So did her credit score. She sold her couch to buy a used GPU. Pain was her blueprint. And she layered that pain into Aurora X. Her company. Her revolution. Aurora X launched quietly in 2016, just before the Ferguson DOJ report went viral. It started with a single contract,
a pilot program with Oakland PD, to test sentencing patterns. What it found was damning. Black suspects were 2.6 times more likely to receive algorithmically inflated risk scores in predictive policing models. Judges had been using those scores to justify harsher sentencing. Imani called it out and almost got blacklisted from 3 state contracts. She stayed the course. With every insult, every sidestep, every "you people" microaggression dressed as a question, she sharpened Aurora X's core engine. When Atlanta came knocking in 2019, she had proof it worked. By 2021, Aurora X was flagging racially skewed algorithms across school districts, housing approvals, and even COVID triage systems. Her tech didn't just analyze data, it turned it into accountability. She had built a sword, and cities wanted it. But the money? The real money? That still came with conditions, and that brought her to the Sterlings. The $1 offer wasn't charity. It was the final step in a long climb. With that kind of capital, Aurora X could expand across all 50 states, partner with UN initiatives, and break into Europe. It also meant Imani could pay every underpaid engineer she'd underpromised. She could give her mother a proper retirement. She could stop fighting for every dollar. But tonight, as she stood inside the resort's secured conference room, her resolve was shifting. The room was dark, glass walls covered with blackout curtains. A decanter sat untouched on the far table. Imani's breath fogged slightly. Aspen's chill was creeping in, even here. On the credenza sat a slim black recorder, no bigger than a lipstick tube. She reached out, fingers trembling slightly, and pressed play. Voices emerged. Familiar, vicious. Marjorie Sterling. She thinks we're buying her vision. Darling, we're buying her engine. The rest is fluff. Bradford Sterling. She's a brand risk. You saw the tweets. Talking about black liberation and algorithmic oppression. You think BlackRock wants that on a quarterly report? Randolph Sterling. Let her sign the damn papers. We'll announce a strategic leadership realignment by Q2. Put someone stable in charge. Lucas Sterling. She should be grateful. First and last black girl that ever gets invited here. She's not the CEO. She's the proof of diversity. Laughter. Laughter. Like the sound that greeted her hours earlier. But now it echoed harder, deeper. Like a warning shot under her skin. Imani stood in silence. Eyes locked on the wall across from her. Her hands curled into fists. She could almost feel her mother's hand resting on her shoulder. Could hear the cough from the cell block when they'd reunited through bars. Could see that little girl in the red coat, her coat staring through glass, never crying again. They thought they were buying her code. They didn't know she'd wired it with failsafes. They didn't know her pain had a memory, and memory had teeth. Across the resort, in the wine cellar where the Sterling sons lounged on leather chairs sipping Pappy Van Winkle, a single red dot blinked silently on a hidden lens. A motion-triggered camera she'd planted earlier, recording everything. She had their laughter. She had their plans. But what she didn't yet know, what no one knew, was that the sabotage had already begun. Just as she hit stop on the recorder, her phone buzzed with a message from her CTO. Renee Miles. Imani, something's wrong. Our AI prototype was altered. Racial risk indicators just doubled, only for black subjects. We didn't code that. Someone else did. The recorder clicked off with a sharp snap, but the words didn't stop echoing. Let's buy it gutted, and rebrand with a real CEO. Imani stood frozen in the private meeting room, surrounded by silence, but her chest throbbed with every syllable still pulsing through her memory. The voices of the Sterling men were crisp, smug, full of centuries-old confidence disguised as boardroom banter. And that one sentence. That sentence felt like a scalpel slicing through every line of code she'd ever written. She set the recorder down slowly, her hand trembling, not from fear but restraint. Across the room, the Sterling crest stared back at her from a mounted plaque, a white lion embossed in gold, standing atop a shield, a sword drawn. Underneath it read their motto, Dominare per honorem, to rule with honor. The irony made her stomach twist. Imani moved to the chair beside the conference table, and sat her knees bent slowly, carefully, as if lowering her body into this seat gave weight to the betrayal. She folded her hands in her lap, her face remained blank, practiced, but inside a cyclone. She had heard enough. Black-owned will scare off real clients anyway. Lucas Sterling had joked, laughing through his teeth, as if the words were some innocent quip. To them it was a joke. Her life's work, her face, her skin, her legacy, all fodder for laughter over bourbon. The true nature of their interest was finally exposed. They didn't see Aurora X as revolutionary or necessary. They saw it as a tool, a marketable trend they could whitewash, strip down, and sell to corporate America as sanitized justice, tech-washed racism. Bradford's voice had been worse than she remembered. Oily and dismissive. Put her on the press materials, smile, then push her into an advisory board, with no teeth. We'll bring in someone more digestible.
Digestible.
It wasn't just the deal. It was her erasure, rehearsed, polished, and scheduled like a calendar notification. The minute she signed those papers, she'd be pushed out of her own house, branded in press releases as passionate but limited, while her life's work was remodeled to fit boardroom tastes. They had no intention of building with her. They wanted her signature, and then her silence. Outside that room, the hallway was hushed. Luxury murmured around her, the low hum of a jazz piano playing from the lounge, the distant clinking of fine crystal. Every detail of the resort now felt cruel in its perfection. The soft carpeting under her heels, the glistening chandeliers, the framed art curated for billionaires, who never questioned whether their names would be on the guest list. She sat back against the cool leather of the chair, staring at the floor, her expression calm but unreadable. Inside, a war was building. What would it cost to walk away? The $1 billion offer wasn't just money. It was oxygen for the next phase of Aurora X. With it, she could expand into global markets, fund the projects in underserved communities, create tech infrastructure specifically for Black and brown neighborhoods that had been historically left behind. She could pay the team that had worked nights and weekends without proper stock options. She could build her mother's dream retirement home, fix her sister's school, create legacy. But it would also mean handing Aurora X to people who didn't believe in its mission. People who would poison its purpose the way they just corrupted her prototype. To fight would mean risking everything. To sell would mean saving the body, but killing the soul. And somewhere in between sat Imani, her heart beat loud in her ears, a lone soldier in a war that was rigged long before she ever entered the room. Her phone buzzed again. A message. Anonymous. No name. No signature. Just a short line that chilled her more than the recorder had. Check what they did to your prototype. Her eyes widened. Imani stood immediately, adrenaline snapping through her limbs. She bolted from the conference room, moving down the hall in controlled strides. Phone clutched tightly, folder tucked under her arm. She made her way past the lounge, past the smirking concierge, past the white-gloved butler who offered her a cocktail menu she didn't see. The elevator ride down to her suite felt like a plunge through ice. Inside the room, she connected her laptop to the resort's private Wi-Fi. Her fingers moved faster than her thoughts, punching in passwords, navigating through layers of security into Aurora X's back-end environment. Renee had already flagged the anomaly. The prototype model, normally hosted on an isolated dev server, had been accessed from a new IP just 2 nights prior. Imani opened the log files. At first glance, everything looked fine. The dashboards were operational. The system integrity hadn't been flagged, but as she dug deeper into the training data, the algorithmic weightings, the labeling functions, something sharp hit her gut. The bias score multiplier had been manually increased for Black identifiers, twice. That meant Aurora X's AI was now rating Black individuals as higher risk across multiple datasets. Policing, loan approvals, job applications. It had gone from identifying racial bias to replicating it. Imani's mouth went dry. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They hadn't just sabotaged her code, they'd weaponized her platform. If it had gone live, it wouldn't have dismantled systemic bias.
It would have disguised it as justice.
And the Sterlings? They would have smiled at press conferences, pointing to Aurora X as proof of progress while it silently undermined every community she'd built it to protect. She sat back, stunned, as the weight of it landed. This wasn't just an acquisition. It was a hijacking. She picked up her phone and called Renee. It rang once. "Imani," came the urgent whisper. "I just saw the same changes. I tried to reverse the last update, but the dev environment's access history is locked down. Someone used a backdoor protocol." "Not just someone," Imani said, her voice cold. "It was them." Renee inhaled sharply. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Imani stared at the monitor. The code she wrote with sweat and survival, now turned against its creator. "I'm going to let them finish their little victory lap," she said quietly. "Then I'm going to burn the whole illusion to the ground." She leaned forward, pulling out a flash drive from her travel pouch. one she hadn't told anyone about. Not even Renee. It held the original prototype clean, uncorrupted, still coated in that tiny apartment years ago, with a cracked coffee mug beside her and Kendrick Lamar playing softly through laptop speakers. She uploaded a fresh copy into a secret GitHub repo, encrypting it twice. She activated a security measure that would send a kill switch signal to the tainted prototype if a breach was detected. She'd been naive once. Not anymore. Just then, another buzz. A second message. This one from a blocked number. Same cryptic tone. They know you found it. Don't eat or drink anything they offer. Stay off resort Wi-Fi. Imani froze. Her eyes scanned the room. Every luxury suddenly felt like a trap. The welcome chocolates. The bottled water. The room phone, blinking with a voicemail. She backed up, her chest rising. The war had already started, and she was on their battlefield. She moved toward the window to close the blinds and saw across the courtyard, in a neighboring suite, a sterling assistant watching her from behind a curtain, phone in hand. Then the assistant lifted the phone, snapped a photo, and vanished. The suite was no longer a refuge. The moment Imani pulled the blinds shut, the sense of comfort vanished. Everything inside, the curated furniture, the plush white robe on the hanger, even the complimentary fruit basket, now felt like set pieces in a trap. Nothing was neutral anymore. Not the room, not the faces behind the luxury, not even the air she breathed. She moved to the corner of the room, disconnected her laptop from the resort Wi-Fi, and switched to a personal hotspot. Then she took a breath measured, deliberate. The saboteur wasn't just some rogue contractor or lazy developer. This was orchestrated, and deep down she knew exactly who was behind it. Her fingers worked quickly, navigating to the admin panel of Aurora X's sandbox environment. She opened the logs, pulled the code history. At first the lines looked clean, then she spotted it, a subroutine that didn't belong. It had no author tag, no commit note, no visible origin trail. But it did one thing with ruthless precision. It recalibrated the AI's racial classification weighting. Specifically, it boosted threat index scores for black profiles based on zip codes, name syntax, and even arrest records dismissed in court, factors that Aurora X had originally been designed to neutralize. Now her system was quietly marking black individuals as double the risk, even if they had clean records. The implications punched her in the chest. If cities implemented this version of Aurora X, police departments would be justified in targeting more black suspects. Schools would flag more black students for behavioral interventions. Housing applicants from black-majority neighborhoods would be rejected under the guise of predictive liability. Her software had been rewired into a new-age redlining machine. She opened her personal journal. Inside it, a yellowed page tore gently in her grip. Her original mission statement, handwritten in block letters from 20. Build truth from broken code. Build safety for those the system erases. Build it so no little black girl waits alone outside jail ever again. Imani stared at the paper. It shook in her hands, torn at the corner. A single drop of moisture darkened the edge. Whether sweat or tears, she couldn't tell. This wasn't just technical sabotage. It was personal desecration. She didn't cry. There were no screams. Just a silent scream inside her ribs. One only she could hear. Then her phone rang. Renee. Imani answered immediately. I traced the breach, Renee whispered, the tension slicing through the line. It came from a cloud instance, managed by a shell company. Guess who owns it? Sterling Group, Imani replied without hesitation. Renee sighed. A subsidiary listed under the name Evermore Strategies. Their COO sits on Sterling's shadow board. Imani, this wasn't sloppiness. This was deliberate. That name. Evermore. It had come up once before in legal documents, buried vague, forgettable. Now it was a ghost in her machine. They planned this, Imani said slowly. They want Aurora X to look progressive, then twist it into a tool that feeds systemic bias under the cover of AI neutrality. Renee was quiet for a beat. They want it to look black-led, but run white inside. The phrase hung between them like a funeral bell. Imani nodded, though no one could see her. They didn't just want my tech, she whispered. They wanted my face. Hours passed. The snow outside thickened, erasing tire tracks, silencing footsteps. Inside, Imani sat in the low-lit suite, tracing the modified code with her eyes, as if memorizing every insult line by line. Each variable was a betrayal. She made a list, not of suspects but intentions. Why boost black risk factors? Why implement it before acquisition? Why build a system to fail under her name? Then it hit her. A PR strategy. If the system collapsed, if lawsuits emerged, if black communities cried foul, the fall would land on her. The first black female CEO in AI justice. They would burn her image into the narrative of failure. The knock on her door was soft, timid. Imani stiffened. She moved silently to the peephole. It was Camille, one of the resort attendants. Young, mixed race, wearing the sterling uniform. She opened the door a sliver. Camille slipped inside and shut it quickly behind her. "There's something you need to see," Camille said, her voice low, terrified. "But I can't stay long." From her jacket she pulled a printed email. Imani read it, her eyes widening. Subject: internal testing update. Compliance alignment. From Bradford Sterling to Evermore testing team. Body: ensure all black sample data is run through the new classifier before launch. We'll position the anomalies as data imperfections in our first board memo, if questioned. Do not copy Imani Caldwell. Imani's mouth went dry. She looked at Camille. "Where did you get this?" Camille hesitated. "My brother works in IT for their firm. He thought it was just legalese. I read it. I saw your name." A pause. "And I've seen too many of us get erased." Imani whispered. "Thank you." Camille turned to leave, then paused again. "They laugh at you, you know," she said, her voice small. "Behind closed doors. They say you're ungrateful, that you should be honored just to be in their room." Imani's breath caught in her throat. Camille opened the door and disappeared into the hallway. That night Imani barely slept. Instead, she typed. She compiled every log file, every code injection, every Sterling email. She placed them into a clean, secure folder labeled Judgment. Then she wrote an email to her board. Subject: emergency board session. 7 a.m. tomorrow. Confidential. Mandatory attendance. This meeting will determine whether we are builders or pawns. Imani Caldwell, founder and CEO, Aurora X. She didn't copy the Sterling observers. Didn't notify the Sterling legal team. She had no time for protocol.
This wasn't business. This was war.
As dawn began to rise outside her window, the sun barely coloring the frost, Imani sat with her old mission statement torn in half before her, and next to it the folder labeled Judgment. The broken past and the future verdict stared back at her like mirrors. The light touched her face, and for the first time in 24 hours, she smiled. Not because she was safe, but because now they weren't. In the building across the courtyard, a figure stepped into view through a frosted window. Randolph Sterling himself, phone to ear, staring directly into her suite. Then his lips moved slowly, and though she couldn't hear it, she read them perfectly. "She's starting to fight. Shut her down." The morning air was razor sharp, laced with the scent of pine and cold betrayal. Imani stood on the private balcony of her suite, arms folded, face still. Below, the sun was rising lazily over Aspen's manicured wilderness, its golden light casting long shadows over untouched snow. Somewhere down the hill, staff were preparing for another luxury brunch. Clinking glasses, warm croissants, laughter in rooms she no longer trusted. But up here on this ledge of calculated vengeance, Imani was planning a war in silence. Randolph's chilling message, "Shut her down," still echoed in her mind. His face at the window, the power in his gaze. He had meant every word. He'd underestimate her before. He wouldn't again. By 7:05 a.m., the Aurora X board was in a virtual emergency session. Each face on the screen, 5 members across multiple time zones, looked drawn, startled. No one had seen Imani this composed, this lethal. Her tone was even. "Control. I'm initiating a forensic review of our acquisition pipeline," she said. "There's been unauthorized access, a subroutine embedded into our flagship model." Racially weighted, a stunned silence. "We traced the breach to a Sterling subsidiary." Another pause. Then the CFO, Marcus Jalen, cleared his throat. "This isn't just a failed compliance matter. This is corporate sabotage." "It's worse than that," Imani replied. "It's targeted erasure. And if we sign the deal as is, they own the narrative." The board began to murmur, but no one said no. No one doubted her. Because when a black woman this focused tells you she's been set up, only fools fail to listen. After the call ended, she picked up her private phone. Time for her first ally, Delilah Monroe, a legal strategist she'd retained months earlier for due diligence. But really, Delilah had one specialty: clean stings with legal teeth. Delilah, Imani said as the line connected. We're going live. Delilah didn't flinch. Tell me what you need. Wiretap clearance, consent laws, and backup cloud storage, with geo-redundancy. I'm about to provoke them. Delilah clicked keys on her end. Colorado is one-party consent. You're legal. Just make sure you store audio in 2 separate jurisdictions. And Delilah, if anything happens to me, I need you to leak everything to the Federal Equity Review Board and the Justice Department. Don't wait for a press cycle. There was a pause on the line. Delilah whispered, understood. Next, Renee Miles, Aurora X's CTO, and her most loyal builder. They met at the rooftop cafe, an open-air space deliberately chosen to avoid surveillance. Renee wore a long trench coat, her laptop tucked beneath it like contraband. Her eyes scanned the rooftop's perimeter like a soldier. Then she slid into the seat opposite Imani. I went deeper, Renee whispered. Not just emails. There's surveillance footage. Imani raised an eyebrow. Of what? Renee pulled out a small tablet and cued the footage. It played a silent time-stamped video of a boardroom. Not theirs. The Sterlings. Their internal meeting. 3 weeks ago. Renee fast-forwarded. Then paused. There, in the center of the screen, Bradford Sterling stood pacing in front of a projection of Aurora X's interface. The captions, transcribed and automated, rolled across the screen. If we inject it now, by the time they notice, we'll own it. Then we phase her out. Clean and easy, just like Carter Tech. Just like Dynacore. Imani leaned in. Go back. Renee did. She rewound to a name. Carter Tech. Imani narrowed her eyes. Carter Tech. Dynacore. They weren't random names. They were Black-founded startups. Both had gained sudden media attention years ago for scaling too fast, then collapsed into obscurity within 6 months of acquisition. The pattern clicked. Imani opened her notes, started a list. Within an hour, they had 7 companies, all acquired by firms connected to Sterling shell corporations. All had had charismatic black or brown founders. All had their core tech twisted, buried, or repackaged. Then the founders disappeared from public life. None of it had seemed connected. Until now. By late afternoon, Imani had a map on her screen. Email threads, surveillance stills, code injections, shell firm registrations, leaked memos, and in the center of it all, the Sterling Group. Her hands hovered over her laptop, her heart thudding, not from fear but clarity. They weren't just coming for her. They had built an ecosystem around swallowing voices like hers. And for the first time in her career, she stopped trying to protect her company. She started preparing to expose them all. At 7 p.m., in the safety of a back hallway, rarely used by guests, she called her final shot. The sting. She opened her email, encrypted a sanitized version of the audio tape, and attached a visual thread of manipulated code, cleansed of names but clear enough to raise questions. Then she sent it to a single recipient. Asha Duvernay, black journalist, investigative bloodhound, firebrand with a following, known for publishing damning exposés that big outlets feared. Imani had met her once, years ago at a hackathon in Atlanta. They shared a moment, 2 black women in tech surrounded by patronizing praise. Her email was short. Subject: if I disappear. Asha. Enclosed is a story that will burn through every corner of their empire. It's clean. It's real. If I vanish, publish it all. Imani Caldwell, founder and CEO, Aurora. She hit send. Then she closed the laptop, heart pounding not with anxiety, but resolve. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was revenge with receipts. Unexpected twist. At 9:12 p.m., a delivery arrived at Imani's suite. A handwritten note, folded neatly atop a small box. The front read, "For the Queen of Disruption." Inside the box, a gold pen, and underneath it a flash drive. No markings. She plugged it in, hesitating for a moment. Inside, one folder, labeled, redacted, racial exploitation playbook. She opened it. Dozens of documents appeared. Memos, slide decks, talking points for corporate diversity acquisitions, strategies for rebranding tech firms while sidelining original black founders under NDA silence agreements. One page caught her breath. A script template for firing a founder during a transition to leadership maturity. It was dated 4 years ago. And next to it, a name. Imani Caldwell. They had targeted her long before she ever stepped foot in Aspen. Imani's phone buzzed again. Asha had replied, "Received." If I hear silence for more than 24 hours, I publish. Stay alive. But then a second ping. From an unknown number. Too late. We know. See you at the negotiation table. One last time. The next morning, the air in Aspen turned brittle, icy with pretense. Imani stood in front of her suite's full-length mirror, tightening the clasp on a gold necklace that shimmered faintly against her mocha skin. At the center of the necklace, a small, custom-designed locket, inside a hidden USB, no bigger than a fingernail, containing every thread of sabotage, deceit, and digital betrayal they had attempted to bury. She smoothed the lapel of her black wool coat. No makeup beyond a matte gloss and liner. Her face didn't need armor. Her eyes were already lethal. This wasn't just a press conference. It was a stage. And the curtain was about to rise. She arrived at the Sterling-owned Summit Lodge at precisely 11 hours as an a.m. The media had already gathered, cameras perched like vultures, a sea of flashbulbs. Event coordinators bustled about with branded signage, Sterling Group Po Aurora X, a partnership for progress. The logo burned like a lie across the screen. She felt a hand on her lower back. Marjorie Sterling, darling, she cooed, voice sugar-coated acid. So glad you're here. Randolph insisted you be front and center. Our brilliant little tech girl. Imani's spine stiffened. The word echoed in her brain. Lip. She smiled, careful not to show teeth. I'm surprised you're not rebranding me as Chief of Smiles and Inclusion. Marjorie chuckled too loudly and waved toward the cameras. Oh, you're such a firecracker. This is going to be just darling. The conference room gleamed with gloss. Walnut trim, marble flooring, a massive LED screen cycling through sanitized images of code, community, and cooperation. In the front row sat high-powered execs, government consultants, influencers flown in to give the illusion of social endorsement. Imani took her place on stage beside the Sterlings. Randolph spoke first. He was every inch the Southern Titan. White hair immaculate, voice syrupy with faux warmth. At Sterling Group, he began, we don't just invest in technologies, we invest in people. And I must say, when we met Miss Caldwell, we saw a young woman of color with potential. We knew we had to bring her into our family. There it was.
Potential.
Not power. Not brilliance. Not legacy. Just potential. The word white billionaires used when they were about to erase you with applause. He continued, voice rising with performative pride. This partnership marks a new chapter in data justice. With Aurora X joining our portfolio, we'll lead the charge towards smarter, safer, equitable policing. He mispronounced Aurora. Imani stood motionless. Then it was Marjorie's turn. And isn't she just radiant? Marjorie purred, gesturing toward Imani. This is what diversity looks like when it meets good business sense. The room clapped. Not wild applause. Just that polite, hollow rhythm of people unsure whether they were complicit or just too tired to care. Imani stared straight ahead. Her hands hung loosely at her sides. Her breathing was steady. But inside she was counting, calculating. How many seconds had passed? How many lies had been told? The USB pressed gently against her skin. Then came the worst blow. Bradford Sterling took the podium, with a shit-eating grin. I remember our first meeting with Imani. She had the fire, you know. Smart. Bold. And that sass. Whew. We thought, now there's a tech girl who knows how to shake up a boardroom. The room chuckled. A black woman behind Imani winced visibly. A young white exec smiled too eagerly. The photographers didn't flinch. Imani blinked. One. Sass girl. Bold. All coded language. All insults with a bow on top. She was no longer Imani Caldwell, founder and disruptor. She had been reduced, publicly, to mascot. Then Randolph turned to her with the theatrical gesture of a king bestowing land to a loyal subject. And now, our partner would like to say a few words. Imani stepped forward. The room silenced. She looked out over the sea of faces. Some curious, some indifferent, some waiting to see if she'd dance to their tune. She spoke slowly, deliberately. Aurorex was never built for partnerships like this, she said, letting the pause carry weight. It was built for communities too often surveilled and discarded. It was built to stop injustice from dressing itself up as innovation. The room tensed. But thank you, she added coolly, for the opportunity to witness what justice doesn't look like. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She turned and walked back to her spot on stage, without another word. Marjorie's jaw clenched. Randolph forced a smile. Amani just stood there, immovable. After the press event, a fake champagne toast followed in the lobby. Imani barely touched her glass. She mingled like a ghost, drifting from cluster to cluster, offering only nods. Every handshake felt dirty. Every smile, weaponized. She could hear the whispers from the Sterling staff. She's hard to manage. She's lucky they even kept her in the deal. One assistant said, too loud. Her skin tone makes the optics so fresh. Another replied, and that attitude? You can't buy that kind of authenticity. Imani left the room before she could vomit. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors slid shut, a hand darted between them. A woman stepped in, mid-20s, tightly braided hair, eyes darting. She wore a Sterling name badge, Amaya J., a hospitality coordinator. They rode in silence. At the 11th floor, Amaya slipped something into Imani's hand, a small folded note. Then she turned, exited at the 12th floor without a word. Imani waited until she was alone before opening it. Handwritten. Ink slightly smudged. 3 words only. You're not safe tonight. Then underneath it, leave now. Her throat dried instantly. The necklace around her neck suddenly felt heavier. Imani rushed back to her suite, heart thudding, only to find the door slightly ajar. On the floor inside her encrypted laptop bag, unzipped, and on the bed, a single Sterling branded envelope. Unsealed. Empty. The hallway was too quiet. Imani stood motionless in the doorway of her suite, her eyes locked on the unzipped laptop bag, the open envelope on the bed like a silent threat. Someone had been in her room. Not to steal, but to warn. Or maybe intimidate. The message was clear. They wanted her rattled. But Amini Caldwell didn't rattle. She grabbed the bag, double-checked its contents. Her burner phone, encrypted drive, a second necklace with a decoy USB. The real one, still warm from her neck, was tucked beneath her shirt, close to her skin. She closed the door silently behind her, not bothering to lock it. This place was no longer hers. Downstairs, Renee was waiting behind the staff entrance, wearing a black fleece and an expression that could stop traffic. She handed Amani a disposable mask and sunglasses. Security patrols rotate every 15 minutes, Renee whispered. There's a blind spot at the northwest gate. We have maybe 90 seconds. Let's move, Imani replied, already striding forward. They kept low, passing through shadows behind the resort's banquet kitchen, the smell of burnt rosemary and smoked meat clinging to the air. The laughter of billionaires echoed faintly from a terrace above them. To the untrained eye, the night was just another luxury dream. But beneath it, 2 black women moved like ghosts, one with evidence, the other with a plan. They reached the gate just as a flashlight beam swept around the corner. Back, Renee hissed, pulling Imani into a cluster of ornamental pine. 2 Sterling guards passed within feet of them, white, uniformed, hands resting lazily on their sidearms. One muttered something about locking down the property tighter tomorrow. Imani didn't breathe. She didn't flinch. She waited for the silence to return. Then they slipped through. Outside the estate walls, they moved quickly along a wooded trail, the snow crunching softly beneath their boots. A silver Subaru was parked near a thicket of trees, pre-arranged, burner-plated and owned by no one on paper. Renee slid into the driver's seat, Imani into the passenger side. They didn't speak until they were 3 miles from the estate. Only then did Amy whisper. The note was real. My room was tampered with. Renee nodded grimly. Surveillance logs at the resort were scrubbed 2 hours ago. I couldn't even find footage of your floor. They were erasing her already. An hour later, they reached an off-grid cabin near Twin Lakes. Renee's friend, a wilderness journalist, had once used it to go off radar during a major whistleblower story. It was perfect, remote, wood-heated, no Wi-Fi, no GPS. Inside it smelled like cedar and defiance. Renee opened her laptop and connected to a military-grade hotspot. She began uploading files to an encrypted cloud storage, mirrored in Iceland, Canada, and Switzerland. These are your receipts, she said quietly. Even if they take us offline, the data survives. Imani stared into the fire. What if this backfires? She asked. What if I go public now and they spin it as tech incompetence? As sabotage by a disgruntled black founder? Renee turned. Her eyes were soft, but fierce. Then we drowned them in truth. The cabin was cold, but the heat from the fireplace was building. Outside the night was silent. Pure snow and pine trees, swallowing sound. But inside, the air was heavy with questions. Imani sat by the window, knees pulled up to her chest. Her mind raced. Go public now and risk the sterling spinning it before she had control. Or wait for the final meeting, confront them face to face, and record the entire thing? Both carried risks. One was strategic, the other emotional. Sometimes, she murmured to herself, burning the house down means waiting until they light the match. She looked over at Renee. Are we still feeding them the decoy build? She asked. Renee nodded. They think they own it. The code is hollow, bare bones architecture. And the real one? Stored. Triple encrypted. No trace. Imani exhaled slowly. She had built Aurorax from nothing. But now it lived in fragments across clouds, USBs in the hearts of black coders who had trusted her vision. It wasn't a company anymore. It was a resistance. The clock ticked past 2 hours. Imani hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours. She lay on the couch wrapped in a flannel blanket, staring at the fire, the flicker of flames dancing across the walls. Every time she blinked, she saw Marjorie's smirk, Randolph's warning, Bradford's smarmy grin. They weren't scared of her. They thought she was temporary, replaceable. They had no idea how wrong they were. Then her phone buzzed. She sat up. A message. Unknown number. CNN just went live. Check national feed. Segment, Breaking Bias in Tech. A CEO's quiet war. Imani bolted upright, grabbed Renee's tablet, and connected to a VPN. It took seconds for the stream to load. There she was. Her face. Footage of her on stage, next to the Sterlings. Voiceover by Asha Duvernay. Tonight, in a shocking revelation, CNN has learned of growing concerns around Aurora X's acquisition by the Sterling Group. Internal sources allege manipulation of racial bias metrics within the company's AI systems, designed originally to protect against discriminatory patterns in law enforcement and public policy. They had done it. The leak had triggered the spotlight. Even before she could act. Even before she was ready. Imani watched in stunned silence. As the segment played, archived interviews of her building Aurora X. In her apartment, testimonials from black engineers. Anonymous voiceovers hinting at white interference in ethical algorithms. Even a blurred screenshot of Bradford's leaked memo. Will position the anomalies as data imperfections. It was happening. She wasn't just fighting back now. She was winning. But the win came with weight. CNN's anchor leaned in dramatically. We reached out to Sterling Group for comment. A representative stated, Aurorax is a valued asset. We are aware of recent false narratives being peddled by disgruntled insiders. The denial was slick, rehearsed. Renee shut the tablet slowly. They're going to come for you harder now. Imani nodded. I know. She stood and walked to the fire, staring into the orange glow. It had begun. There was no going back. Only forward into the storm. Her phone buzzed again. A second message. This time, from CNN's senior producer. We're live in 4 hours. Do you want to go on air and speak for yourself? The country is listening. The cabin smelled like firewood and anticipation. At 5:43 a.m., Imani sat before a ring light jury-rigged from a camping lantern, a camera angled slightly above her laptop. She wore a simple navy blouse, natural makeup, and a calm expression that belied the storm beneath. Renee adjusted the frame, ensuring the background showed nothing but pine through a cracked window. Off-grid but credible. A CNN producer counted down in her ear. 5, 4. You're live in 3. The camera light turned red, and Imani Caldwell entered America's living rooms. The anchor's voice was polished, cautious. We're joined now by Imani Caldwell, founder of Aurora X, whose company is at the center of a growing national scandal involving AI bias, corporate sabotage, and one of the most powerful families in tech investment. Ms. Caldwell, thank you for being here. Imani's voice, low and steady. Thank you for giving truth a place to breathe. She took a breath, the kind only a woman who's been silenced too long knows how to take, and then she began. This isn't about a bad deal, she said, her tone razor sharp. This is about strategic racial erasure. The Sterling Group attempted to acquire my company under the guise of innovation. But behind closed doors, they rewired the product I built to harm the very communities it was designed to protect. The segment cut to a clip, voice recordings from the Sterling boardroom. Bradford joking about scaring off real clients with a black CEO. Marjorie mocking Imani's leadership style. The anchor reappeared. You're alleging they deliberately altered the AI to increase racial bias. I'm not alleging it, Imani said. I'm proving it. She leaned forward, clicked. On screen, two charts appeared side by side. Left, original Aurora X data distribution. Right, the tampered version. Black applicants flagged at 2.1x risk for identical metrics. The visual was stark, undeniable. She clicked again. Another leak. Board memos from a Sterling subsidiary, referring to optical diversity and rebranding risk narratives before 2025 elections. The silence that followed was heavier than noise. Even the anchor's voice faltered slightly. "And what do you want now?" Umani paused. "I want every black and brown founder who's ever been laughed out of a boardroom to know they weren't crazy, that their intuition was right, that power doesn't just corrupt, it curates erasure." She looked straight into the camera. "And I want the Sterlings to know, we're done smiling through sabotage." By the time the segment ended, the internet was on fire. Within minutes, Aurora Exposed began trending on X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Black Twitter turned up like a digital choir. She gave them clean code. They gave her corruption. "This is why we don't trust VC money. They want our ideas, not our names." Imani Caldwell is our Harriet of hard drives. Major influencers stitched the segment, their reactions ranging from awe to fury. Civil rights attorneys, activists, and grassroots organizations began rallying in real time. Aurorax was no longer a startup. It was a movement. But the backlash came just as fast. Within the hour, trolls flooded her inbox. "You're just bitter you couldn't scale. She's playing the race card because her tech flopped." One anonymous post read, "Black women always think accountability, racism. It's a weak excuse for being unqualified." Another more sinister from a known alt-right account. "Funny how she talks equity now. Bet she couldn't pass a basic comp sci final without crying discrimination." The digital dog whistles weren't even subtle anymore. By mid-morning, Sterling's legal team had mobilized. They issued a formal cease and desist, accusing Imani of defamatory, unsubstantiated claims and threatening legal action for breach of contract and corporate slander. Her PR email began flooding with media requests. Renee watched Imani closely from across the cabin. "They're trying to spin it," she said. "Say you leaked confidential materials out of emotion." Umani didn't blink. "Let them," she said. "They weaponized professionalism for centuries. I'll weaponize my humanity." Then came the twist she didn't expect. Her personal phone rang. Unlisted number. Washington, D.C. area code. She answered. Cautiously. "This is Imani Caldwell." A crisp official voice replied. "Miss Caldwell, this is Agent Darnell Hayes with the Department of Justice Technology and Equity Division." Imani straightened in her seat. "We've reviewed the broadcast and the supporting documentation you uploaded under encryption this morning," the agent continued. "Your evidence confirms a clear violation of federal tech compliance standards, specifically under Executive Order 13985, Racial Equity in Federal Agency Algorithms." Imani said nothing. "We're opening a formal investigation, effective immediately." Agent Hayes paused. "And, Miss Caldwell," his voice darkened, "you should know, Aurora X wasn't the only system they altered. By sunrise, the Aspen sky was a cold, perfect blue, deceptively peaceful, like a lake before the plunge." Imani sat at the edge of the cabin's porch, hot tea in her hand, watching smoke rise lazily from the chimney. But her focus wasn't on nature. Her phone screen pulsed with chaos. Aurorax was no longer just trending. It had detonated. Federal headlines blasted across every major outlet. FBI launches investigation into Sterling Group over AI bias manipulation. DOJ opens civil rights probe into algorithmic tampering in law enforcement tech.
Whistleblower CEO Imani Caldwell may reshape how America regulates AI.
And then came the footage. Grainy, dark, clearly from a hidden body cam. FBI agents storming the Sterling Group's Denver headquarters at 4:30. Suits, guns, black Suburbans. Randolph Sterling being escorted out in handcuffs, his expression blank but burning. Imani watched the clip 3 times. She didn't smile. This wasn't a win. It was a reckoning. Behind her, Renee stood stunned. "That was fast." "They had it ready," Imani said, her voice soft. "They were just waiting for someone to expose the pattern." Renee turned the volume down on the tablet. "The entire Sterling board has been subpoenaed, and 3 of their shell firms were frozen under the RICO statute. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar collapse." Imani took another sip. "The empire doesn't fall until the walls stop pretending they're load-bearing." By 10:15 a.m., Sterling Group's stock had dropped 38%. Global investors panicked. Brand partners pulled out within hours. Nike, SoftBank, and even Stanford University issued statements distancing themselves from the sterling's values. But that wasn't what broke the internet. That came later, from TikTok. The video appeared on an anonymous account called A Truth Before Profit. It showed Lucas Sterling, barely lit, slightly drunk, holding a champagne glass at a private event the weekend before Aspen. The audio was unmistakable. I don't care how genius she is. She's still a knocker with a laptop. The crowd in the background laughed. Then, let her pitch. We'll buy her out, replace her, then let the equity crowd cry over it. The video looped, over and over, until it spread like fire across every corner of the internet. Within hours, Sterling is rotten surged into the top trending tag on every platform. Influencers, thought leaders, and former Sterling partners dropped receipts of microaggressions and gatekeeping. One former black intern released a thread detailing how she was told not to wear her natural hair during donor visits. Another VC tweeted, "I turned down a Sterling check in 2020. Now I know why my gut screamed." Umani's name was on every news alert, every podcast, every front page, but she wasn't basking in glory. She was reading the messages flooding her inbox. LinkedIn, over 500 new messages in 24 hours. Offers from global funds, think tanks, Ivy League lecture circuits. We've admired your courage. Let's talk board seat opportunities. We'd love to have you keynote our Responsible AI Summit. Would you be open to founding a fund under our umbrella? Blank check? Imani scrolled, expression unreadable. The very rooms that once shut her out were now knocking on her door like beggars with resumes. Renee watched her from across the table. You know you could take one of those checks, right? Go full-time activist. Raise a platform. Imani shook her head slowly. I'm not done, she said. This isn't about just me. It never was. Later that night, as the snow fell in sheets against the cabin windows, Imani sat alone in the kitchen. Her mind wandered, not to the scandal, not to the success, but to the moment it all began. A cold metal bench in the Bronx. A little girl waiting for her mother to be released from a cell she never belonged in. That little girl had believed in rules, in fairness, in work ethic. But she'd grown up to see how those things meant nothing, when the system was built to erase your reflection before you even stepped into the room. She'd built Aurora X for that girl. But now, Aurora X was a trigger, a mirror, a red flag on every corporate battlefield. And war had consequences. A sudden knock at the cabin door jolted her from her thoughts. Umani stood cautiously. Renee appeared silently beside her, holding her phone, camera recording just in case. She opened the door. No one was there. Just a small, flat black box. No name, no label. Renee picked it up, turning it over. It's encrypted, she whispered. No markings. Umani opened it carefully. Inside, a flash drive, and a folded note. She unfolded it, typed, clean. One line. They tried to kill us too. Lucent Core. Umani froze. She knew that name. Lucent Core had once been a rising star in predictive analytics. Black-led, social impact focused. Acquired quietly in 2018 by a firm called Paragon Equity. Months later, the founder disappeared from public view. The site rebranded. Their ethics charter vanished from the homepage. No one questioned it. Now someone had sent her their digital obituary. Renee stared at the drive. This is the next link in the chain. Imani nodded. They're not the only ones. She opened her laptop, plugged the drive into an air-gapped machine. Dozens of files appeared. Internal chats, meeting recordings, strategy documents, each one detailing how Lucent Core's AI was quietly re-engineered, stripped of its ethics framework, fed biased datasets, and licensed to private contractors for surveillance in schools and public housing. One document was titled Conversion Protocol, From Equity to Efficiency. Another listed 12 other startups, marked for acquisition, based on underperforming capitalization, a high PR impact. Imani whispered. They built a manual for erasing us. She closed the laptop, and for the first time since Aspen, she felt something colder than fear. A deeper truth settling in. This wasn't about her. It wasn't even about Aurora X. It was about the blueprint. A system that fed on the genius, trauma, and trust of marginalized founders, and spit out sanitized white-led brands in their place. She was now the breach in their dam. And the water was rising. Renee's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She showed it to Imani. A message flashed on the screen. You're next. If you publish that drive, we'll finish what we started in. The cabin had become a war room. Imani sat at the center of it all. The Lucent Core drive connected to a secured air-gapped laptop, screens pulled up in every corner of the small living room. Renee moved silently between devices, decrypting, cross-referencing, uploading. Outside, the mountain wind howled like a ghost, warning the world of what was coming. The documents from Lucent Core weren't isolated anomalies. They were breadcrumbs in a machine, built to consume black innovation and spit out diluted profits. By noon, Imani had logged 4 additional companies with nearly identical post-acquisition footprints. Black founders erased from leadership, ethics missions scrubbed, tech repurposed for surveillance or profit optimization in high-risk communities. Civic Nova, Urban Lens, Pulse Safe, TrueSight Analytics. Each name came with a buried story. Each one, someone's dream turned into someone else's instrument of erasure. She needed to find them. By nightfall, Imani had tracked down 2 former CEOs, one through a deleted Medium blog, still floating in cash, the other through a LinkedIn group for underrepresented ex-founders. The first call was with Tasha Green, the original mind behind Urban Lens, a platform once designed to analyze school resource allocation through an equity lens. Bought out in 2019, never heard from again. When Imani introduced herself, there was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "You're the woman burning Sterling to the ground," Tasha whispered. "Trying to," Imani said. "You're doing more than trying." Within days, the conversations multiplied. Jada Moore of Civic Nova, Charisse Doyle from Pulse Safe, Lena Hassan, whose TrueSight platform was absorbed and rebranded within 90 days. Each story bore the same scars. Hostile acquisition, sudden NDA pressure, restructured boards, backdoor code injections that altered the product's ethics at the core. One by one, their systems were twisted, and their names were erased from history. None of them had ever gone public. Until now. Imani brought them into a secured digital room. They called it the Vault. Every woman logged in, behind VPNs, real names blurred. Trust was slow to build, but the truth did its work. They compared documents, shared fragments of emails and old contracts, still legally gray but telling. Even incomplete, the patterns were undeniable. Terms of service amended without notice. Unmarked clauses referring to legacy transitions. Disappearing clauses about profit sharing. Analytics dashboards suddenly rerouting to corporate clients without founder access. A web was forming, painful, brilliant, and impossible to ignore. Imani stood in front of it all. "We have enough for a federal class action lawsuit," she told them. "Multiple counts, racial targeting, IP theft, civil rights abuse cloaked in legal acquisition." The women stared through their screens, wide-eyed but resolute. "They were counting on our silence," Jada said. "They weren't ready for us to talk," added Lena. Then Tasha. "Let's make them hear us. Loud." The next week was a montage of fire. Imani's legal team expanded to include 2 pro bono civil rights firms. Renee helped draft a full systems audit timeline, complete with visual proof of every manipulated code change. Their coalition grew, 9 women, then 14, then 23 black and brown founders. Some wept during the calls. Not from fear, from the relief of being seen. They called it the sabotaged sisterhood. A phrase once whispered now roared. On a quiet Thursday night, Renee walked into the cabin, holding a red folder. Inside, printed letters. One from a tech professor at MIT. One from the director of Amnesty International's Digital Ethics Division. One from a civil rights museum in Washington. All 3 offering partnerships, platforms, and the main stage at TED. They wanted the women to speak. Together. Imani closed the folder and nodded slowly. "Not a panel," she said. "A statement." A month later, under a blue California sky, the women walked onto the TED stage, not as victims, but as architects of their own reclamation. The talk was titled "How We Got Robbed and Fought Back." 23 women. 23 voices. 1 mic. The audience held their breath. Each woman told a piece of the truth. How algorithms were rewritten. How contracts were worded to erase ownership. How their platforms were redesigned to harm the very people they'd built them for. Tasha ended with a line that cracked the air. "We built systems to protect the people they fear. So they bought us out and turned those systems into mirrors of themselves." The crowd stood before the mic even clicked off. Within hours, the talk went viral. 10 million views. Subtitles in 14 languages. curriculum in 4 universities. Sabotaged sisterhood became more than a movement. It became an archive, a living museum of resistance. But the war wasn't done.
Imani sat alone backstage, scrolling through messages on her secure phone.
Then it came. A dark notification. No sender. Just one word. Connect. A new link appeared. Black screen. Blinking cursor. Renee leaned in behind her. This feels heavy. Imani tapped in. A moment passed. Then a video loaded. Black screen. A distorted voice. The signal glitched, as if pulled through firewalls, stacked like dominoes. Then came the message. We're Ghost Equity. We've been watching the sabotage since 2017. We have everything. Logs, source code, internal Slack dumps, even video. We opened the door. We've been waiting for someone with teeth. Let us in. Imani stared at the screen. The cursor blinked once, then twice. Then came the final line. But be warned. If you let us in, we won't stop. The file arrived just after 3 a.m. Imani was seated at the long pine table in the cabin, her laptop bathed in soft amber from the oil lamp above. Renee stood nearby, eyes fixed on the black screen that flickered to life with no password prompt. No credentials, just the cursor blinking like a dare. Then it unfolded. Operation Conversion Architecture. 73 pages of corporate rot. A confidential playbook. Written in clean, soulless language. Circulated among 10 of the world's top investment firms. The cover bore a thin gold watermark. Internal strategy only. Retention rebrand. Redeploy. And beneath it the subtitle. Leveraging DEI assets for market stability and public trust. Imani read the words aloud. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. The manual broke down the takedown process into 7 clinical stages, each one surgically designed to remove founders specifically black, brown, and female, without public scandal. Stage 1. Validation acquisition. Invest early. Use diversity to signal equity. Stage 2. Media positioning. Flood press with branding photos. Lean into first black woman. Stage 3. Technical audit. Assign internal engineers to support development. Begin source code extraction. Stage 4. Strategic concern. Leak data instability claims. Quietly question founders' scaling ability. Stage 5. Board realignment. Vote to install mature leadership. Offer advisory role as decoy. Stage 6. Brand reframe. Remove mission language. Insert neutrality protocols. Stage 7. Ghost exit. NDA the founder. Erase digital footprint. Retain IP under new corporate identity. Renee whispered, they turned our entire existence into a spreadsheet. But what stopped both women cold was the appendix.
A list.
Dates. Company names. Internal code names. 29 ventures flagged as pre-qualified for transition. 11 of them had been black women founded. 6 had been quietly dissolved within 18 months of acquisition. 1 had been led by a single mother from Detroit. Another, a neurodivergent teen prodigy from Atlanta. All erased. All logged like product returns. Imani scrolled until she found it. Codename North Star. Founder Caldwell. Imani. Timeline Q1 2025. Reframe and redeploy. She felt her lungs contract. They had mapped out her end years ago. Before she ever set foot in the Aspen Lodge. Before her Series A. Before Aurora X had won awards or launched in pilot cities. They never planned to partner. They planned to replace her. From the beginning. Ghost Equity didn't just leak the file. They dumped it all. Slack screenshots. Call recordings. Investor group chats mocking black founder energy. Private email threads suggesting they offload woke ventures before election season. The next morning, every major media outlet was scrambling to catch up. TechCrunch, Bloomberg, Wired. Even the Washington Post ran the headline in bold. The manual that killed diversity. How firms co-opted minority innovation for power and profit. Public outcry erupted like a second wave. Former employees at big-name firms came forward. Venture capital assistants leaked internal memos. Analysts confessed they'd flagged the patterns but been told to stay in their lane. Then came the government. Within 48 hours, Congress announced an emergency hearing on tech equity and algorithmic ethics. Committee members cited the Ghost Equity drop by name. A new task force was formed to investigate how tech money had enabled systemic erasure through acquisitions disguised as empowerment. And at the center of it all, Imani Caldwell, the woman who cracked it open. An official email arrived that evening. Ms. Caldwell, you are formally requested to testify before the House Subcommittee on Digital Ethics and Emerging Technology. Your account is now central to the national record. Renee placed a hand gently on Imani's shoulder as they read it together. You ready? She asked. Imani didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window, snow drifting past like silence descending. Then she nodded. It's not about ready. It's about right. But truth had a price, and someone out there wasn't done fighting dirty. That night, as the fire burned low and the laptops were finally closed, Imani's phone buzzed with a blocked number alert. She almost didn't answer, but her instincts told her it wasn't the press. She stepped outside to the porch and picked up. No voice greeted her, just static. Then distorted, low. Capitol Hill's not safe for you. If you speak, you won't make it to the hearing. The line cut. Imani stared into the dark woods beyond the cabin. A single owl hooted once, then fell silent. Renee emerged from the cabin behind her. Everything okay? Imani turned. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. They just threatened my life. The cold in Washington that morning wasn't like Aspen's. It was sharper, meaner. It cut through fabric and into bone. But Imani Caldwell didn't flinch. She stood at the foot of the Capitol steps, black coat buttoned high, shoulders squared. The sky above was pewter gray, not a hint of sun, the kind of sky that looked like justice before it cracked. A security agent approached her silently, earpiece glinting. Ma'am, he said with a nod, we'll walk you in. The hearing room is secure. Imani didn't answer. She just looked up to the very building that had ignored women like her for centuries. Not today. The room was a crucible of suits and judgment. Dozens of congressional aides lined the walls. At the center sat the subcommittee. Senators, reps, both parties, faces fixed in a performance of neutrality. Behind the glass barrier of the upper gallery sat journalists, academics, and one woman whose presence grounded Imani more than any bodyguard ever could. Danielle Caldwell, her mother. Her eyes shined with tears. Not sorrow, recognition. The chairman cleared his throat. Ms. Caldwell, the floor is yours. Imani adjusted the mic. The room went still. She began not with emotion, but with data. For the record, Aurora X was developed in 2016 to address algorithmic disparities in policing. Its codebase was peer-reviewed by 3 independent labs and contracted by 7 U.S. municipalities. She tapped her screen. On the projection, a chart showing black individuals rated 2.1 times higher for risk in the altered version of Aurora X compared to the original. She continued, what you're seeing here is not an error. It is a manipulation, intentionally coded. Another click. More data. Side-by-side comparison of board communications, AI output reports, and memo timestamps. Silence. Not the polite kind, the kind that precedes collapse. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But when she spoke about the stolen companies, the erased names, the NDAs used as silencers, her tone sliced through the room. We were told we were being elevated. What they meant was repurposed. Our innovations were framed as liabilities. Our identities, a phase in their branding strategy. She paused, looked up. My mother was once jailed for asking why a teenager was being beaten on the street. She raised me to build tools that questioned those beatings before they started. Danielle wiped a tear with the back of her hand. Then Imani dropped the final card. She pulled the Ghost Equity Manual from a folder. This 73-page playbook, she said. Voice even. Details how elite firms target minority-led ventures intentionally. It instructs how to dilute mission, how to erase founders, how to rebrand ethics as inconvenience. Gasps. On the screen behind her, a slide appeared. Legacy transition strategy. Final phase. Ghost the founder. Inherit the optics. No one moved. Even the Republican from Kentucky leaned forward. Imani ended with 6 words. This isn't equity. This is extraction. When she finished, the room didn't immediately react. There was no applause, no burst of chaos, just the kind of silence that follows the reading of a will. Because something had just died, and something else had just been born. 2 hours later, the verdict hit the press. 6 Sterling Group executives were indicted on charges of civil conspiracy, algorithmic bias fraud, and digital misrepresentation. Multiple firms listed in the Ghost Equity leak were subpoenaed. A tech oversight committee was announced within the hour. And at the podium of the press room, the Speaker of the House said something America had never heard before. We owe Imani Caldwell a debt for dragging this truth into daylight. A national equity task force was launched that week, mandated audits of AI platforms, grant funding for Black and Indigenous developers, an annual ethics review board. In 2 days, Imani's testimony reshaped the future of American technology. But the system doesn't fall without bruises, and power never surrenders quietly. Imani stepped out of the hearing room, into the cold, flanked by 2 aides and her mother. Flashbulbs greeted her like fireworks. One reporter shouted, "Do you feel safe now?" Imani paused. "No," she said, "but I feel seen." As they stepped onto the sidewalk, she turned toward her mother, who smiled faintly. Then she froze, because from the corner of her eye, Imani saw it. A black SUV speeding down the avenue, far too fast for traffic. Its windows were tinted. Its engine roared louder than the crowd. Secret Service agents screamed. Danielle grabbed Imani's hand. The SUV jumped the curb, and everything slowed. The SUV missed her by inches. The tires screamed as it tore across the sidewalk, crashing through a government-issued trash bin and clipping the edge of a barricade. Shouts erupted. Secret Service agents descended like a wave, guns drawn, barking orders that blurred into background noise. But Imani Caldwell didn't fall. She didn't scream. She stood, still holding her mother's hand. Danielle was pale, but calm, her eyes locked on her daughter, as if silently asking, "Are you ready for the next level of this war?" Imani squeezed her hand. "Yes," she whispered, almost to herself. "Let them come." The driver was gone by the time agents reached the car. Abandoned. No plates. Burned VIN. Classic ghost vehicle. They offered her protective detail. Around-the-clock surveillance. Bulletproof SUV. New housing. Imani declined it all. "I've lived my whole life knowing my skin is a target," she said coolly. "I'm not about to hide now that the crosshairs are clearer." The lead agent shook his head, muttering, "You're braver than most of Congress." She didn't reply. Because this wasn't about bravery. It was about refusal to shrink, to run, to let power dictate posture. 3 weeks later, the world had changed, but Imani hadn't retreated. She was standing in front of a building in downtown Oakland, sun catching the glass facade behind her. No logo, no fanfare, just a new future being built from ash and intent. She turned to the camera crew from a local Black-owned media outlet. "You can pan up," she said with a smirk. "They'll want to see what we've built." The lens tilted skyward to reveal a brushed steel plaque. "Found Her Ventures, a fund for Black women founders, by one who refused to be erased." The office was minimalist, modern, and humming with possibility. Inside, the walls weren't covered in startup jargon or minimalist art. They were covered in portraits, dozens of Black women, all founders, each image accompanied by a quote pulled from their worst rejection letters. "Too niche for market appeal. Too bold for our comfort zone. Too Black to scale." Imani walked the corridor every morning before meetings. Not for decoration, for accountability. Each face was a flag. A reminder. This time, they would build where the gates once stood. Renee stood at the head of the long conference table, outlining the first fund's rollout strategy. 15 million in seed already pledged, she said. But we're holding until the board is all Black women. Not just cosmetic diversity. Actual builders. Imani nodded. And sourcing founders? We've got over 700 applications in 2 weeks. Ideas in health tech, education, community finance. Some of them coded prototypes in shelters. Others worked through domestic abuse. Imani exhaled. "This isn't just a fund," she said softly. "It's a repair center for stolen futures." The first founder they funded was a 23-year-old from Houston, with a chronic illness who created an app to map environmental health risks in Black neighborhoods. The second? A formerly incarcerated woman from Philly building a job-matching algorithm for marginalized youth. Imani sat with each of them, not as a gatekeeper, but as a mirror. She told them, "Your trauma isn't a weakness, it's architecture. Build from it." They listened. They built. And the world noticed. Netflix called on a Friday afternoon. The executive producer didn't waste time. "Miss Caldwell, we want the rights to your story. Full creative control. A limited series. You'll eat." Imani paused. "I've got more stories to write first," she said. "But if you're serious, start with the sabotaged sisterhood. Tell all 23 stories. Not just mine." There was silence on the other end. Then, done. The Found Her launch video went viral. Black girls from Detroit to Dakar filmed themselves walking into libraries, opening laptops, whispering, "Found hers next." Universities began inviting Imani not as an honorary guest, but as curriculum. Case studies were written, panels filled, think pieces penned. She had become more than a whistleblower. She was a blueprint. But then, just as momentum surged, a quiet bomb dropped into her inbox. An investment inquiry. Unusual sender. Large number. Bradley Sterling III, managing partner, Equinox Holdings. Subject: strategic reconciliation proposal. $100 million anchor check. Imani clicked. Inside, a sleek pitch deck, sterile fonts, gilded margins. At the center of the proposal, a single slide. "Let's heal the wound and build generational wealth together." The email's closing line chilled her. "We believe Found Her deserves to scale, and we're ready to put family behind it." She stared at the screen. Bradley Sterling III, the cousin, the quiet one. The same man who'd sat silently at the Aspen Lodge as his relatives mocked her behind her back. Now he wanted in. Now that the name was hot. Now that the narrative had flipped. Now that her voice was too big to erase. Renee stepped into the office, sipping from a Found Her branded mug. Imani turned the laptop toward her. Renee read the screen, then blinked. "That's not just irony. That's generational audacity."
Imani didn't laugh.
She clicked reply. Her message was 4 words. "We're not for sale." But as her finger hovered over send, a second message came in. From an anonymous sender. Just a line of text. No subject. "Bradley isn't just funding you. He's funding her. Look closer." Imani's heart skipped. She opened the message and saw a screenshot of a wire transfer from Equinox Holdings to a new startup in Chicago. Founder Amaya J., former Sterling employee, the one who had slipped her the warning note. Imani closed her laptop slowly. Eyes narrowed. The boardroom lights flickered once. Then again, something was coming. And it wasn't just money. The meeting was set in a neutral space, a boutique hotel rooftop in San Francisco, with soft jazz in the background, and a view that tried too hard to look effortless. The air smelled like lavender and careful power. Imani Caldwell arrived first, early as always. She wore all black slacks, blazer, turtleneck, with her signature Found Her pin on her lapel, a tiny gold flame, meant to remind every woman who wore it that she was born to set systems ablaze. She didn't bring a notepad. Didn't bring her laptop. She wasn't here to take notes. She was here to end a chapter. Bradley Sterling III arrived precisely on time, flanked by a nervous assistant and the faint aroma of expensive regret. He wore a tailored navy suit and the sort of smile men in his lineage perfected over generations. Measured, practiced, disarming. They shook hands. Brief. Cold. No cameras. No press. Just the past trying to negotiate its way back into the future.
They sat.
For a moment he studied her face, perhaps searching for the girl his family tried to erase. The one they called HR material. The one they tried to bury beneath NDA clauses and smile-polished betrayal. But she wasn't there anymore. "Imani," he began, voice even. "First, let me say what happened. What they did was shameful. You should have never had to endure that." She blinked once. The way black women blink when they've been gaslit so many times. The air around them practically hums with restraint. "You were there," she said softly. "I was," he admitted, "but I wasn't in control. I wasn't." "Then why are you trying to buy the narrative now?" The question didn't snap. It slithered between them. He leaned in. "Because you changed the world. And I believe you deserve the runway to scale. Found Her globally. I have $100 million ready to anchor your next fund. No strings. Just vision." She nodded slowly, as if weighing something. Then she smiled. But it wasn't the polite smile of a grateful founder. It was the kind of smile that carried centuries. "We're not looking for colonial money," she said, her tone silk and steel. Bradley blinked. "Excuse me? We don't take checks from the same bloodlines that built their fortunes off erasure, and then labeled it legacy." He stared at her, expression unreadable. "You're turning down $100 million? I'm turning down 100 years of attempted ownership." The assistant at his side looked like he wanted to disappear into the lavender walls. Imani stood, adjusting her blazer with the poise of a woman who knew her rejection would echo. "I don't need your money," she said. "I need your silence." Then she walked out, heels tapping like punctuation marks on the marble floor. That afternoon, back in her office, Imani opened her laptop and pulled up the official offer letter. She took a screenshot of one paragraph, the one where they promised complete autonomy in exchange for equity alignment. Then she opened X, formerly Twitter. She typed slowly, deliberately, offered $100 million to compromise the future. We left it on red. Reclaimed the table. She attached the screenshot. Pressed post. It detonated. Within 3 hours, Reclaim the Table was trending in 26 countries. Memes flooded the timeline. Black women walking into boardrooms with crowns. A gif of Amani's TED Talk captioned, "Still not for sale." Black founders shared rejection letters they once received, now rewritten as affirmations. One tweet went viral. She said no to $100, so we could say yes to ourselves. CNN did a segment on the cultural impact of refusal. It's called her the Queen of the Comeback. And Ava DuVernay reposted the tweet with the words legacy redefined. But it wasn't just noise. It was activation. In the days that followed, Found.her received over 2,000 new applications. Black founders, queer technologists, disabled innovators, all ready to build, ready to rebuild, ready to be believed. The inbox overflowed with blueprints. One founder from Baltimore wanted to create an AI that predicted community violence and redirected funds to prevention programs. Another, a single mother in Jackson, had designed a prototype for equitable credit scoring using social capital metrics. They weren't just coding tools. They were designing justice. Renee stood at Amani's office door, holding a white envelope with a gold seal. "Something came," she said. Amani looked up from her desk, her face tired but aglow. "What now? Another firm trying to apologize with equity?" Renee shook her head. Time magazine. Umani took the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside, a black card. Embossed. Elegant. Time Person of the Year. Nominee, Amani Caldwell. She stared at it, then laughed softly. Not from disbelief, from the audacity of it all. The little girl from the Bronx. The woman they mocked in Aspen. Now inked in history. She stood and walked the gallery wall in her office, where the portraits of rejected founders stared back at her. Underneath one photo, a woman in a head wrap, arms crossed defiantly. The quote read, "The market won't understand your voice." Umani reached out and pressed her hand against the frame. "They do now," she whispered. But across town, in a building lined with velvet and strategy, another meeting was taking place. Bradley Sterling sat at a round table with 3 older men. On the table, documents, wire transfer logs, investor spreadsheets. One man said, "She's unbuyable." Another replied, "Then we need to invest in her competitors. Quietly. Cut the knees before she builds legs too strong to follow." Bradley didn't respond. He just looked down at his phone. The tweet was still open, $100 left on read, and 1 million people cheering for it. That night, as Amini walked through her quiet office alone, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A message. "You've been chosen. The next round won't be a pitch. It'll be a battle." The past played in fragments. A chair scraping against polished wood in a Colorado lodge. A brittle laugh, the kind that cuts without volume. "Did you even build it yourself?" "She looks like HR, not a CEO." The silence that followed. The burn that didn't show on her face, but never left her ribs. Then further back, an iron bench outside a Bronx precinct. Little Amani swinging her legs, waiting. No jacket, no mother. Just the cold, and her sketch pad. The comments. The rejections. The patronizing pats. The meetings where they smiled at her skin and stabbed at her coat. And finally, the SUV, black, speeding, purposeful. Missing her. Barely. The moments that almost ended her had built her instead. Now, Amani stood in Accra, Ghana, on soil that didn't question her presence. A breeze carried the scent of citrus, red earth, and promise. Behind her, a newly finished building gleamed in the morning light. Wide glass panels, solar panels glinting atop the roof. Bold signage etched in both Twi and English. Found.her, West Africa Innovation Hub. A crowd had gathered for the ribbon cutting. Women in vibrant kente wraps. Local developers. Elders from nearby communities. Children clutched small code notebooks passed out earlier by volunteers. And at the front, 3 girls, no older than 10, huddled around a tablet running Python on solar power. One of the girls stood out, braided hair pulled high, confidence in her stride as she stepped forward and greeted Imani without flinching. "My name is Imani too," she said proudly. "My mother named me after you." She said you made the world stop long enough for us to be seen. Imani blinked hard, then knelt. You're going to build something no one sees coming. She said gently, just promise me you won't let them convince you to shrink. The girl smiled. I'll grow sideways if I have to. Later that afternoon, as the event faded into celebration, Imani stepped into the new satellite hub, clean sunlit, filled with beanbags, 3D printers, and 24 laptops humming with untapped genius. At the far wall was a massive mural, commissioned secretly by the Found Her West Africa team. It stretched 10 feet tall, layered with bold brushstrokes and woven thread. Imani stared at it in silence. It showed her face, soft, determined, but around it swirled the fragments of every moment that tried to break her. Aspen, the courtroom code snippets rewritten without her name, a burning SUV, a broken chain. And across the bottom, in gold, legacy is louder than hate. Renee stepped in, holding her phone. You need to see this, she said, passing it over. The screen showed a video clip, Harvard Law School's Diversity and Tech Symposium. A professor stood at the podium, holding up a copy of the Caldwell Doctrine, a policy now studied globally. Her testimony didn't just reshape digital ethics. It shifted how we define the ownership of identity, equity, and innovation, the professor said. And starting next semester, the fall and rise of Imani Caldwell will be required study at both Harvard and Spelman. Imani leaned back against the wall. For the first time in years, she let her smile fully bloom. Her phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number, but not blocked. Subject line: reckoning or resolution. Attached: a short message. Let's talk. Old wounds deserve clean sutures. I don't want war anymore. I want a truce. R. Sterling. Renee read over her shoulder and frowned. They don't want peace, she said. They want proximity. To your influence. To your redemption. Imani stared out the window. Below, more girls filed into the hub. Some held their code notebooks like passports. Others held nothing but curiosity. They can want whatever they want, she said. But she didn't delete the message. She didn't respond. She just let it sit, like ash cooling in the breeze. Across the world, Found Her was expanding. Johannesburg, Toronto, São Paulo. A partnership with Spelman's Tech Incubator. A curriculum co-authored with Nairobi's top university. Each project anchored in the belief that justice wasn't a post, it was a platform. And at the center of it all was Imani. Not as a symbol, as infrastructure. A letter arrived at Found Her HQ 2 weeks later. Handwritten, elegant cursive, from an elder civil rights activist turned judge. When you walked away from their check, you walked into our history. When they mocked your pitch, you rewrote the floor plan. And when they tried to silence you, you sang louder, until they couldn't hear themselves over your truth. Imani placed the letter inside the same folder as her first rejection email from Silicon Valley. It wasn't pettiness, it was preservation. They underestimated her once. Never again. 1 year later, as Imani prepared to open Found Her's Middle East division, a secure envelope landed on her desk. Inside was a single page. You don't know me, but I was one of the silent architects of the ghost